Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Ben Reynolds, producer and host of the Vent webinar series. We're excited to welcome you to this webinar featuring the great national parks and game reserves of Northern Tanzania. In February and March, the greatest wildlife spectacle on Earth takes place with up to 1 million wildebeests, 500,000 Thomson gazelles, and 250,000 common zebras in herds of tens of thousands concentrate together to calve on the short grass plains prior to the rains. Our Northern Tanzania tour is one of the greatest adventures, offering daily birding extravaganzas and abundant big game: elephant, giraffe, zebra, lion, leopard, and cheetah in the famous national parks of Arusha, Serengeti, Lake Manyara, Tarangire, and the Ngorongoro Crater Conservation Area, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Guiding us on this virtual journey is Vent guide Geoff Lockwood, live from South Africa. Welcome, Geoff.
Hi, Ben, and good morning, everybody.
For over 40 years, Geoff has been a leading voice in Southern Africa's birding community, contributing as an illustrator, author, and active member of organizations such as BirdLife South Africa. With an impressive 874 species recorded in the region, he ranks among Southern Africa's top birders. His lifelong passion and deep expertise make him the perfect guide for this virtual journey and the ideal leader to join on our February 2026 departure. Over the next hour, Geoff will share highlights from our Northern Tanzania tour, introducing you to the birds, mammals, landscapes, and experiences that make this trip so special. He'll also provide an inside look at what you can expect as a participant, from the famous game reserves to the chance of seeing Tanzania's most iconic species. We are thrilled you're here, and we encourage you to jot down any questions that come to mind. There will be time at the end for a question and answer session. With that, let's get started and turn it over to Geoff.
Right, well, welcome, everybody. And as Ben has indicated, this is one of the most remarkable and special wildlife areas on the planet. I know when I was growing up, I feasted on stories of many of the reserves which we visit on this tour, and they really do not disappoint. They offer insights into behavior of animals, which over much of the rest of Africa is just no longer possible. These vast migrations which cross political borders as though there's nothing there are just something so special to behold that I honestly urge all of you who, like me, may have grown up dreaming of the wild places in Africa to actually experience this incredible spectacle for yourself. And as you'll see, we're going to be traveling together pretty much as we would do on the tour. And I've tried to give as broad an indication of the kind of wildlife experiences that are possible on these Vent tours. Greetings from Johannesburg, South Africa, and welcome to a webinar which takes us to Northern Tanzania for what is widely regarded as the greatest show on earth. The Vent tour in February and March actually is designed to try and coincide with what is known as the Great Migration, an incredible scene of mass herds of wildebeest and other animals traveling across the African landscape in search of fresh green grass triggered by the rains. And this spectacle defies belief. It is the greatest movement of herd animals anywhere on the planet. It involves millions of animals traveling through country borders, across roads, across rivers, and it takes in some of the most famous and most amazing wildlife places in Africa. The Great Migration is incredible in its scale. At times, you will have over 1,000 animals packed into less than half a mile, moving in these great columns of maybe 4 abreast. And the numbers are just so vast that you can actually see these moving trails of animals crossing the landscape from space. Over 1.2 million wildebeest, over 300,000 zebra, along with numbers of topi, eland, and other antelope or gazelles, move in a constant cycle between the Serengeti Mara parts of this incredible savanna ecosystem. And the trigger for this movement are the seasonal rains. So our tour, starting as it does in the beginning of the year, is timed to hopefully coincide with the start of the rainy season, the second rainy season in Tanzania. And this triggers a movement out of Kenya, out of the Mara in Kenya, of these incredible numbers of animals. And they travel basically from west to east in search of new grass that is brought along by the recent rains. In addition to these incredible numbers of herbivores, there are large concentrations of the major predators in Africa, the lions, leopards, cheetahs, and hyena, wild dog, and even the crocodiles in the large river systems which these moving herds of animals have to cross, all cash in at the time of this incredible spectacle. If we're lucky and the rains play along with us, we will make contact with this movement, and we will, in all likelihood, see the incredible interplay between these herbivores, the wildebeest, soon after their arrival on these new greening grass plains, actually will calve within a couple of weeks, hoping to flood the country with prey so that at least some of their young survive. And of course, the predators in this time have it as easy as they will ever have during the year. And we typically come across kills on most of the days as we drive around. The northern Tanzanian area is incredible. As a youngster, I grew up reading of the places that we visit on this tour, the Serengeti, the Mara, and these incredible scenes. And it is just amazing for me as an African to actually be able to witness something which in most parts of the world has now stopped. It's stopped because of fences, of borders. And in this part of the world, what has been going on for millennia is able to continue, and we're able to enjoy this spectacle on our trips. The tour brings us to Arusha, which is the gateway to the Serengeti and the Ngorongoro wildlife area, which is the core area that we visit on the trip. And it is the sort of safari capital of Tanzania. And we will arrive, and our first couple of nights we spend at a really pleasant, restful lodge called Ngorongoro, which is located in the foothills of Mount Meru. And it is a wonderful place to recover from the joys of transatlantic travel. It has beautifully laid out gardens with a very luxurious forest attendant, and even in the grounds, you're able to start what will be an amazing journey of discovery into the birds and the mammals of this amazing country. The birds range from the gaudy and incredibly bright and bizarre to some of the trickier, more sparrow-like species which challenge our birding skills. And then the mammals, particularly the mammals, but also other animals, including reptiles and other things, are equally well represented and as important on this tour. At Ngorongoro, as I said, beautifully laid out gardens, a lovely wetland system right next to where we dine. And it's a great place to actually, as I say, shake off the effects of travel and also to start this incredible, exciting voyage of discovery into all these new animals and birds that are possible on the tour. Within the grounds, we have 2 species of monkey. The most spectacular is the guereza, or black and white colobus monkey, which is a rather placid animal, which in all likelihood will herald the dawn for you as you wake in your well-appointed cabins. And also in the grounds, we actually have a number of different hornbill species, including this incredible bird, the silvery-cheeked hornbill, as well as another monkey species, which is the Sykes or blue monkey. And these two are frequently around in the gardens of where we stay at Ngorongoro. On our first full day of the tour, we will actually drive from our lodge to the Arusha National Park, which is actually located on Mount Meru. And it's a wonderful reserve. It's actually well laid out. It's got a nice road network which takes you into a variety of habitats and giving us exposure to a variety of birds ranging from wetland and grassy savanna species to the bird on screen, which is one that we would hope to see in the more forested sections on the slopes of Mount Meru. After our introduction, and Mount Meru, Arusha National Park, has a number of the larger game species like giraffe and African or Cape buffalo, as well as smaller antelope, as well as the various birds that we would hope to see on our first day. We will then fly. We drive from Ngorongoro to the Arusha Regional Airstrip, and we fly into the Serengeti in one of the planes that you see up illustrated top left, where we will meet our game drive vehicles that have left Ngorongoro the day before with the bulk of our luggage. These planes, there's an issue, the packing space is limited and weight restrictions are fairly tight. So the big bags will go with our game drive vehicles and meet us in the Serengeti. And all we would take would be a small day pack and our cameras and so on the flight with us. We land and then drive to Kubu Kubu Tented Lodge in the central Serengeti, which is where our real exposure to Africa and its animals will start. And the pictures on screen will give you some idea of what to expect. The individual accommodations are well separated and isolated from each other. They are really beautifully appointed. The main area has this wonderful wooden deck, which gives you this vantage out over the grassy savannas, a wonderful pool, and what is widely regarded by all the people from Vent who have commented on it, probably the best shower in the world. So each of your units has this wonderful outdoor shower where you can stand and look down into the valley below and pick up anything basically is possible. And it's not unheard of for guests to actually be late for breakfast, because when they tried to leave their rooms, there were lions lying around outside their cabins. So you're in real wild country. And one of the common things in all of our national parks we visit on this tour is there are no fences. So in the evenings, you will be guided back to your room by someone who actually will make sure that you don't bump into anything unexpected and untoward. It can happen. It hasn't happened to us. And obviously, none of the lodges would like the complications of a close or too close encounter with something dangerous. So they do take very good care of us. This is just a view of the interior of the main lounge dining area at the lodge. And as you can see, the appointments are very luxurious. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to kick off our tour through the Serengeti system. Drives out from Kubu Kubu take us into the more grassy open plains. And depending on the situation with the rains, this area could be teeming with tens of thousands of wildebeest and other game. But whatever, there will be antelope and their predators. There are also a wide selection of birds, including this absolute icon of the more open grassy savannas of Africa, the secretary bird, massive terrestrial eagle that strides around looking for anything it can startle up out of the grass, including snakes, but also tortoises, ground nesting birds, and other things. Also, on our daily drives out from Kubu Kubu, there are a number of river systems, and this is typical of one of those. There's what looks like a large number of blackish rocks in the last bit of water visible on the screen, and these are in fact a large pod of hippo, which shelter in the rivers during the day, emerging at dusk to go and feed out on the grasses. The birds are, as I mentioned, spectacular and highly varied. Charlo's turaco is one of the more striking and spectacular birds possible, but there are numerous others as well, and they make up an equally important and fascinating part of our tour. The variety is amazing. I think on our tour earlier this year, we actually managed just over 420 species of birds recorded, and we also recorded over 40 species of mammal, plus a number of reptiles as well. So on the screen are just some of the variety of terrestrial game birds, spurfowl and francolin. Also, widespread through these grassy areas are members of the lark family, and whilst a lot smaller than the game birds, some of them can be really attractively marked, but generally the short-tailed lark is more typical of this family. Rather cryptic birds, not necessarily all that obvious or easy to see, and then sometimes a little challenging to identify, but nevertheless an interesting part of the avifauna of the grassy savannas on our tour. We're right in the heart of testicular country in this tour, and it is possible to record at least 20 different species as we travel through. Testiculars are not everybody's cup of tea. They are quite tricky, cryptically marked, but most of them have very distinctive calls, and they also separate the habitat or microhabitats out between them quite nicely. So once you start getting a feel for the sort of habitat you're in, is it sort of aquatic sedges or is it more grassy? You start getting a feel for which of the various testicular species it could be that you're looking at. And then typically, as I mentioned, the call is usually the most definitive way of sorting these birds out. It's not all about sort of dull and rather challenging bird families. There are some really spectacular birds on our tour, and the starling family in particular offers quite a wide range of different birds, ranging from the rather drab and rather unusual ashy starling to some of the more typical species and some of the more striking species, in fact, that we see on the entire trip. Weavers are also very well represented on this tour, and Africa obviously is a stronghold for members of the weaver tribe. But basically what we're looking at here is just a handful of the potential species that are available. And included are birds like northern brown-throated weaver, which is a typical true weaver building a solitary, beautifully woven grass nest. Two interesting species that are more social in their behavior and build communal nests or communal apartment blocks with individual nest chambers for each individual pair within. So again, another interesting and very diverse, as you can see on screen, remarkably diverse group of birds, which actually provide a lot of interest and entertainment as we travel through the Serengeti system. Hornbills are also pretty well represented, and here on screen you see 4 of the possibilities on this tour. Ground hornbills apparently have just actually been taken out of their own separate family and are now considered one of the groupings within the true hornbills. But these are birds that are quite obvious. Usually they sit quite prominently. They're reasonably large for the most part, to very large in the case of the ground hornbills. And as a result, we tend to see them often and usually quite well. Another group that we have spectacular views of on these tours, on most of the tours, are the bustards. And here are just 3 of the potential species. Porty bustards are often displaying at the time we're there, and this male is strutting his stuff in these very short open plains near Ndutu. The white-bellied bustard is one of the more attractive species, a smaller bird, and unlike its larger cousins, it's more vocal and aerial in its displays rather than the sort of more static or slow-moving strutting displays of the larger bustard species. And then another bustard, the black-bellied, which is a bird we got to see really well in the Ngorongoro Crater National Park. That is another example of the more cryptically colored birds, which tend to blend in awesomely well with their surrounding habitat. Of the smaller seed eaters, Africa is famed for the number of really brightly colored and attractive seed eaters. And this just gives you an idea of some of the birds that we saw this year's tour. A very beautiful range of birds. And on the colorful side, we also have a group of birds that were fairly common and widespread for the most part on the tour. Gray-headed kingfisher is one of the most attractive kingfishers of the species we saw on this trip. And it was also one of the most abundant and widespread. Another very striking looking bird is the silver bird, and that was also found in a number of locations, while lilac-breasted rollers were a little more scattered and sparse. But the most interesting one on our tour possibly was the white-throated robin, or Irania, which is a reasonably common migrant from Iran, as the name, alternate name would suggest. But it actually, in spite of its incredibly bright and striking coloring, is usually very difficult to see. It tends to stick in the hearts of the thickets, and we were really lucky to see this at Olduvai Gorge Visitor Center. Parrot species are well represented as well, the African parrots and the lovebirds. And these 4 on screen were all birds that we saw well on our tour this year. And then sunbirds are another brightly colored group that is well represented on our tour. And this just gives you a cross-section of some of the species that we did see. Gorgeous sunbird, for those of you who've traveled possibly in East Africa before, this is a recent split from what was previously regarded as the dark-bellied race of beautiful sunbird. And it is now regarded as its own distinct species, the gorgeous sunbird. So something to look out for, and something that we found at a number of our stops through the Serengeti. The rosy-throated longclaw is a member of the wagtail and pipit family, and it's one of the more striking members in the group. more colorful members. And this is a bird we saw both at Ndutu Plains, but also within the caldera of the Ngorongoro Crater. Other really nice and interesting terrestrial birds that we found are both members of the actual courser family. The coursers and the pratincoles fall together in the same family, the Glariolidae. And these birds are interesting because the top one, the three-banded courser, in addition to being a little terrestrial insectivorous bird, is also nocturnal, whereas its cousin, the double-banded courser, is active during daylight. And we saw both these species on the tour. Sandgrouse, there were 3 sandgrouse species on the tour. 2, the black-faced and the chestnut-bellied, we saw well coming into water in one instance, and also feeding in the grassy bottom of the drainage line at the other. But the third species, the yellow-throated sandgrouse, we only saw in flight and at some speed passing overhead, which is unfortunate because this is the largest and possibly the most impressive in terms of its looks of all the sandgrouse species on the tour. The whole Serengeti system is based on volcanic soils, which are incredibly rich. And basically, when the rains add the missing element of water, you get this incredibly lush and luxuriant growth, which is the basis for the greatest show on earth, this incredible movement of the larger mammals. But it also provides food for all sorts of smaller stuff, ranging all the way down to insects, but including large numbers of small reptiles, lizards, and so on, as well as small mammals like rodents. And as a result, our tour is in some of the best raptor watching areas that I've been to, and the diversity and the numbers of raptors that we see is really impressive and a great addition to the birds on the tour. Apart from the pygmy falcon you've just seen, birds of prey range in size from medium, including birds like the brown snake eagle and Wahlberg's eagle, and other more specialized raptor species like the African harrier hawk with its bizarre ankle joint, which actually opens out beyond 180 degrees, which allows this bird to clamber around, probing those feet down into recesses in stumps or into bird nests and fishing out the youngsters hiding within. The eastern chanting goshawk, which is a very striking bird, which obligingly tends to sit up right on the tops of trees, or in this case, on the tops of the power poles running next to the roads. African fish eagles, which are related to the bald eagle, are vocal members of the raptor group, which typically associate with any of the water bodies that we visit. And here's another snake eagle, the black-chested snake eagle, in this case a juvenile. And these birds are well at home in the more open parts of the system that we drive through and visit on our tour. The reason being that they are the largest of our raptors that regularly hunts off the hover. So it doesn't need a tree or a pole to perch from, and so it can launch an attack on prey. It literally will go looking for the prey in an absolutely tree devoid environment, which is great for some of the areas that we visit. And then the largest of the true raptors, the true hunting birds, is the martial eagle, the biggest of the African eagles, very large, the leopard-faced vulture, as well as smaller species like this gorgeous bird on screen, the white-headed. And both the leopard-faced vulture and white-headed vulture have been recorded on occasion hunting for themselves. They will take small animals, particularly youngsters, newborns and things like that, of the smaller mammals. But like most of the true vultures, they rely principally on carrion for their food. Owls and owlets that we saw on the trip include pearl-spotted owlet, really feisty little Glaucidium owl, and then the African scops owl, which is probably our smallest nocturnal owl species. And then the largest, the Vero's eagle owl, which we saw on a number of occasions throughout the trip. At the very start of the trip, on our first night after dinner, we also at Ngorongoro managed to actually call up a pair of African wood owls. And that is something that we obviously would try and do on every visit and subsequent tours. On the larger side, we range from the rather bizarre and rather ugly, to be honest, looking marabou storks, which have this really strange inflatable pouch, which you see retracted at this instance at the base of the neck. And this literally can hang down almost to the height of that bird's ankle joints visible on screen. So it certainly is not the most beautiful looking bird. In fact, I've seen it described as a scruffy looking undertaker. And then at the other end of the scale, you have these really stately and stunning looking southern grey crowned cranes, which are a feature of the crater system at Ngorongoro. Not only is our tour timed, we hope, perfect for watching the arrival of those columns of wildebeest, but it is also a great time to see numbers of European and Asian migrants, Palearctic migrants, which are spending their northern winter in Tanzania. So on screen, you have birds like the redback shrike, Isabelline wheatear, western yellow wagtail, and we saw numbers of different races or subspecies of western yellow wagtail in various parts of our tour, and then also tree pipits and other warbler species. So you get great value. Not only are you seeing a lot of the African species, traditional African species, but you're also getting a chance to brush up on some of the European and Asian stuff as well. I mentioned the fact that your reserves, and also more importantly, your lodges where we stay, have no fences in them at all. And this is an illustration of why a sign like "do not pass beyond this sign" are there. They're there for a very good reason. And this was a very placid elephant bull just quietly mooching around on the edge of camp. But at night, all bets are off. There could be anything out there. And because of that, when you move from the dining area and the restaurant back to your lodge, your cabin, you will actually be guided in each case. And you also have people literally on watch throughout the night, making sure nothing comes into camp that could be a problem for the guests. Now, when we were there earlier this year, the rains had begun very early. They'd begun in January already. And this had triggered the movement of the wildebeest herds out of Kenya, down through the corridor on the western side of the Serengeti, through the central Serengeti, which is where we will be starting our visit to this area. And they were now in the Ndutu Plains area. And they were still waiting for the follow-up rains, which should have triggered the sprouting of this new fresh green growth, which would then have been the signal for all the heavily pregnant females to start dropping their calves. The rains, that follow-up set of rains, just hadn't happened. And in fact, the follow-up rains only really started about 3 weeks after our tour had ended this year. And as a result, the wildebeest were moving around in anticipation or in hope of being there when the next rains came. And so it was a bit of a randomized movement. But on this morning, we had actually headed out from Ndutu, and we got to a slight rise, and looking off to basically the northwestern horizon, all you could see was this black ribbon. It would disappear into a hollow and then reappear closer, and so on. And as far as I could see, to the furthest horizon, there was just this black ribbon, and the distance it looked not even ant-like, but as it got closer and closer and closer, you realize this was just the steady stream of wildebeest in a column that stretched for 20 plus miles. And it just was the most incredibly joyous and wonderful feeling to watch behavior that has been going on all this time, long before we were here. And in spite of all of the modern problems like borders and international issues and roads and everything else, these animals continue to move and are allowed to move backwards and forwards twice a year. And it just was so wonderful that in Africa we could still offer and experience this incredible spectacle. As they got closer, we were heading for a series of marshy pools, and this is where these animals were making for as well. So this is now the sort of front end of that miles and miles and miles and miles long column of animals. And they just arrived at the water, slaked their thirst, and then carried on heading off in the direction where they were hoping that the next rains would be falling soon. With them were other animals, principally smaller numbers of zebra, but also standing off at a distance, various other antelope species as well. So it was a great place. It's a focus of animal activity. It's obviously important to these animals, having crossed a fairly large expanse of waterless habitat. So this is obviously a great place for your predators to hang out and just wait for food to drop in. After Ndutu Plains, we actually traveled across, heading towards the Ngorongoro Crater. Ndutu Plains falls in the Ngorongoro Wildlife Management Area. So it's not national park. It's an area that you can go off track. There are no real roads other than the main road leading through. And so you can go off track if there's anything particularly interesting that you would like a closer view of. We then, after leaving Ndutu Plains, we first stopped at the Wildebeest Gorge, the famous Wildebeest Gorge, where the Leakeys actually made the discovery of Lucy. And Lucy is one of the famous hominids, early pre-humans, that actually was found in various parts of Africa. And the visitor center that we had lunch at offers an incredible oversight of the prehistory of humankind, from places as far afield as Ethiopia all the way down to my part of the world, South Africa. And it puts these various finds into some kind of progressive context, and also gives some indication as to what had driven the process of change from these early pre-humans that had very limited brain capacity and very limited skills, into peoples that became more, or pre-humans that became more and more capable and developed various traits like advanced communication skills and so on. After leaving Wildebeest, we began our climb up the sides of the Ngorongoro National Park. Ngorongoro itself houses the largest unbroken caldera on the planet. It's a breathtaking scene. It's the top picture was taken from our lodge, where we spend 2 nights visiting the floor of the crater in between. It's up to nearly 16 miles across. The sides of the crater rise about 2,000 feet above the floor. And each day we would drive down from our lodge around on the lip of the caldera, descending down into the crater and then coming out via a different exit route. And at the bottom, this is just some of the scenery you get. There's a large central lake, which has flamingos and vast numbers of other aquatic birds. There are all sorts of game. Most of the game in the crater are sedentary. They are not part of this big mass migration that we've been talking about and which we observed at Ndutu earlier this year. So these animals are sedentary, and most of the animals are down in the crater. They have leopard, they have cheetah, they have lion, they have elephant, as you can see, they have buffalo, of zebra, and resident herd of wildebeest. So basically, it's like watching in a large fishbowl. It's literally like, sort of the mammal and bird watching equivalent of being in an aquarium. And it's really quite amazing what you do and can see down here. The lodge we stay at is also really well appointed. And this is another interesting thing about this tour. You do get a chance to actually explore some of the local culture. And this is a group of young Maasai men performing a traditional jumping contest, which they do to impress the women. What else? And the women are a fairly tough crowd, and they have these amazing collars, beaded collars, which actually sit loosely over their shawls. And it's rather fun because when a young man actually is particularly impressive and is able to jump particularly high, the women show their appreciation with this by sort of moving their chests up and down in a way which actually causes this beaded collar to bounce up and down and make a noise like a rattle. And that's how they indicate which of these young men has attracted their attention and their favor. After leaving Ngorongoro, we were heading for a very interesting farm called Gibbs Farm, which is a really interesting and worthwhile birding destination. But on the way, we were offered the chance to visit an artisanal coffee producer very close to where we were going to be staying that evening. And it was really wonderful to actually find out more about how coffee is grown and produced. This particular young family, the whole family was part of the operation. The father was busy roasting the coffee. The young owner and his wife were actually busy dehusking the beans, dried fermented beans that you see in picture in this screen, in a pestle and mortar. And this is them hard at it. And then that was then passed over to the father who did the roasting, and this is now post-roasting, where the beans, the still warm beans, were sieved to get the last fragments of husk off before they were then bagged and actually sort of sold off. And then we were given a chance to actually brew some of the coffee that we had helped actually produce. And those of us who would like, who were very keen to take back coffee as a souvenir or gift for friends, were given these or bought these wonderful little bags of coffee sealed in a plastic bag, which they sealed up against the red hot kiln that they were using to actually roast the coffee over. And then the wife that you saw working the pestle and mortar with her husband actually sewed on a little treadle sewing machine these beautiful little cloth bags as covers for our coffee. So really a lot of, in fact, everybody on this year's trip thought this was one of the greatest, the most interesting stops on the tour. Apart from birds and mammals, we saw a number of different reptiles. The red-headed rockergama was probably the most striking and unusual, but the helmeted or marsh terrapins, something you would probably be calling a turtle, fairly common as well in the muddy pools that we visit on the trip. And the only chameleon we saw, and there are several that are possible, but the only chameleon we saw this time was, in fact, the most common and widespread species in Africa, and this is the common or flat-necked chameleon. Then we saw a number of interesting reptiles, but probably the most striking, apart from the very large crocodiles that we saw on some of the water bodies in Serengeti itself, was this very large Nile monitor, which was being anxiously watched by a spur-winged lapwing. They obviously had chicks or a nest nearby, and they were very concerned that this monitor lizard was up to no good, and they literally sort of marched it off the property. So that was a great view of a fairly common but not often seen reptile. Predators, I mentioned that all of this lush vegetation, and particularly nutritious vegetation, just produces a wealth of food in the way of insects, small mammals, larger mammals, and so on, for an equally incredibly diverse group of predators. And like most well-fed predators, there's an awful lot of lying around. At the top, we had two lionesses that had actually just found the perfect place to lie up during the heat of the day, and that was in a culvert underneath the road, nice and cool, had nice sort of ventilation blowing through, and so there's nothing that looks more relaxed than a lioness like this. But the cheetah was trying hard. These were two young males that were lying up in the shade of a bush, also looking impressively well fed and not too worried about anything until it was time to hunt for the next meal. This lioness was probably about 15, maybe 18 feet up off the ground. And we don't normally think of lionesses, or lions for that matter, being able to climb trees, but it's not common, but they can obviously, as you can see here, do quite well. And this lioness was enjoying the cooler breeze up there, and also enjoying the advantage of the extra height to scan the surrounding country for whatever was going. I don't think at this point she was thinking much about food, because she looks particularly well fed as it is. And this was back where we saw the wildebeests coming down to the water. This was a honeymooning male and female lioness that were right at the end of the process. For about a week, this couple would have been inseparable. They would have been mating maybe 5 or 6 times every hour or so. And in that time, there's no time for eating or anything else. And they were literally at the end of that intensive stage of mating. And nearby, there was one of the pride, a female from the same pride, that was busy feeding on a freshly killed young wildebeest. This lioness was down in the Ngorongoro Crater, and it was quite strange because we'd stopped for something. In fact, it was a golden jackal, the first we'd seen on the trip. And suddenly Tina noticed, there was a spotted hyena in the background. And then when we looked again, there was also a lioness. And we watched as the lioness walked right past the spotted hyena without any real obvious interaction. And she looked like she was going to cross the road that we were traveling on, maybe 300-400 meters further down the road. But we stayed where we were, and pretty soon there were a whole queue of cars, rushing to try and be where she actually was intending to cross. And I jokingly said to Tina, just watch, she's going to come and lie down in the shade of our vehicle. And at this point, she was walking diagonally away from us. And at the last minute, she turned at right angles and walked straight up to us, and eventually literally plopped down, resting up against our back tire in the rut of the road. And everybody in the vehicle looked at me and said, how did you do that? And I kind of said, I have absolutely no idea, but it was one of the most incredible things. And she lay down in our shade for a couple of minutes, and then got up, walked off between the cars, and carried on heading down towards the central lake, which looked like it was her ultimate destination. At Ndutu, we had a couple of really good views of leopard in different situations, mostly up in trees. In most cases, and in this case, it was the same as well, there was a kill in an adjacent tree, and the leopard was just resting up off the ground in the adjacent tree, and it allowed everybody really brilliant views of these gorgeous cats. It's always wonderful to see leopard, and when you see them really well and close, this is an added bonus. We saw cheetah again. This was again at Ndutu, and in this case, it's a female with a young cub. She would typically have had anything up to maybe even 5, but obviously it's a very tough life for these youngsters, and with all the other predators in the area, losses are high. But the youngster shows a very interesting feature. You can perhaps pick up the remnants of a very white, shaggy coat of hair over the shoulders and down the back of this cub. And this is something which is supposedly a mimic of this sort of back of a very aggressive and quite ill-tempered small animal called a honey badger or a ratel. And honey badgers have been known to actually cause lions to back off, full-grown lions to back off. And there's a very strong indication that this mane that you see on young cheetah is possibly a protection against the attention of other predators, both large birds like martial eagles, but also possibly other mammal predators like the leopards and lions in the area, and possibly even hyena. One of the smaller cats we saw particularly well, and this was also close to Ndutu Lodge. This is a serval, and this is like a large, long-legged, short-tailed house cat with very big ears. And these cats prey on typically smaller animals like rodents, mice, and so on. But I've actually seen one killing a medium-sized venomous snake. And it is incredible to watch these cats when they are hunting, because they typically smack the prey very rapidly with their front paws and their front claws. And they literally sort of keep doing that until they're able to grab it with those sharp teeth that you can see in picture. On the dog tribe side, we had spotted hyenas on several occasions, as well as one view of a pair of side-striped jackal disappearing through the long grass. And then down in Ngorongoro, we had the golden jackals for the first time. And these actually are more wolf-like in their structure. And so are actually more typically, or more correctly, should probably be called golden wolves. Giraffe and other large mammals are present. They're not found in the Ngorongoro crater simply because there are not enough trees. These are typically browsing animals, as you would expect from an animal with such towering stature. And so they just are not found down on the floor of the crater. But what is really strange is that Ngorongoro is home to probably the strongest and most secure population of northern black rhinoceros left in the world. And why I say it's strange is this animal is also, strictly speaking, over most of its range, a browsing animal. It will typically be feeding on bushes and small shrubs and so on, rather than the grasses that you see in picture here, and which is the typical vegetation of most of the crater floor at Ngorongoro. But we saw these animals on both days, unfortunately at some distance, but it really is quite interesting that here in Tanzania, these animals are actually more typically found way away from even the limited bush cover that you do find scattered on the floor. In front is a Thomson's gazelle on alert, and these small antelope are some of the most attractive of the whole antelope tribe. And we should see plenty of these on our tours. Other mammals include one of the smallest antelope, the Kirk's dik-dik, or Damara dik-dik. If any of you have been in Namibia, you may have seen this animal there named Damara dik-dik. There's a Grant's gazelle, which is suckling her newborn. We literally saw this little youngster stagger to its feet for the first time and have its first meal. So this is typical of this time of year when we're in Tanzania on these tours. There's a lot of birthing going on. In the major wetlands, boho reedbuck is possible. And then again, in several places, we saw several groups, large groups of African or Cape buffalo. So nice selection of other mammals as well. Common zebras, as I mentioned, usually traveling with or in the vicinity of these large groups of wildebeest on their sort of goal-oriented treks. But this was a smaller herd at the last camp that we visit on our tour. And this was the last national park we visit, the Tarangire National Park. And this was just a wonderful scene, these wonderful zebra coming down and standing literally belly deep in the water to get a drink with the others waiting patiently in the background. Tarangire as a park is pretty amazing. It's famed for two things in particular: the large numbers of elephant that occur in the park, and also the large numbers of very large baobab trees, which are characteristic of this area. And these baobabs look, particularly at the time when we were there, almost devoid of life. Most of them have lost their leaves. So they look for all the world like a tree that has been pulled out of the ground and then planted upside down, so that what are technically the branches look no more, or look a lot more like, rather, the tangled root mass of the tree. And these massive trees can literally, I've seen baobabs in Tarangire where 10 of us, if we'd been allowed out of the vehicle and linked our arms and tried to actually sort of encompass the girth of this tree, we would have come up horribly short. They're massive trees, they're succulent stem trees. And one of the amazing things is, if by any chance a tree does fall, within a year, it disintegrates into a pile of fiber. It looks so vast, so substantial, so impenetrable, but literally it disintegrates into fiber in a year. Now, this is a breeding herd heading out of the woodland down towards the marsh system, which actually runs through Tarangire National Park. And everywhere you looked, you would see maybe up to 8 or 10, or sometimes a few more animals moving together in a breeding herd, which is led by a dominant female, or the matriarch. And we had one such a group coming towards us, so we just stopped where we were, and these animals were grazing and feeding as they came, and were moving quite slowly and quite relaxed, but coming straight towards us. And eventually, the female, the matriarch in this group, she came right up to the front of the vehicle, and she stood just in the road, making sure we could not start moving, while the smaller elephants in this group crossed the road just in the safety behind her. And once she didn't threaten us, she was just literally patiently waiting and being, very protective. And she then moved off with the last of the real littlies in the group. And this guy was one of the sort of latecomers, and he sort of suddenly saw us and came literally striding straight up towards us, trunk up, and he stopped and sat there sniffing us. And when this picture was taken, the tip of his trunk was not more than 15 inches from my face. And it was just the most unbelievably magical feeling that this incredible animal, he was more than big enough to really damage either our vehicle or ourselves really badly. He just came out. There was no aggression. There was no threat. There was no fear. There was just this curiosity. And he literally came up to give us a sniff and see what we were. You could literally hear him breathing through that trunk. It echoes amazingly. And I could literally count the freckles going down into his nostrils. And everybody on the vehicle just held their breaths. It was the most amazing, special experience. And we were so privileged to have this awesome animal, literally as close as he was, with no indication of any fear or any anxiety or even any anger. It was just this wonderful curiosity to see what we were. And those are the special moments that make this part of the world so amazing. You can't promise anything, and it is almost guaranteed that something unforgettable, unexpected is going to happen. It doesn't matter how often you've done this trip, and it doesn't matter how often you come back. Every trip is different, and every experience offers something new and something deeply, deeply special. So Northern Tanzania is just incredible. I would like to thank you for traveling with me this evening or this morning. I hope that I've shown you just a fraction of what this incredible part of the world has to offer. And I would be really glad if on some future tour, I get the chance to meet and travel with some of you. Thank you again for attending, and also my very grateful thanks to Karen and Laurie and Tina, who all very graciously allowed me to use some of their own images for this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geoff, for that insightful and engaging presentation. It's always a treat to see Northern Tanzania come to life with your stories and photographs. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. We're glad you could be here. Before we get to the live question and answer session, I want to go over point out the details of this tour, and also tell you that the detailed itinerary is available to download in the handout section of the toolbar. So Northern Tanzania, birding and wildlife in the Serengeti, Ngorongoro Crater and beyond will operate February 17th through March 5th, 2026 with Geoff Lockwood. The tour price is $18,995 per person and double occupancy from Arusha. The tour is limited to 6 and there are 3 spaces available. So I encourage you to register now before it sells out. Contact Tour Operations Manager Patrick Swaggerty to register, or you may book online with our new website. So with that, let's move to the question and answer section. For the audience, any questions you have, please put in the chat or the Q&A section of the website. As those are coming in, Geoff, I had a question for you about the safari experience. Can you tell us what it's like to drive in these safari vehicles, and how are you approaching the animals and the birds? How close are they? What is that like?
Okay, so if you can think back to that early slide where I showed our aircraft that we fly down into the Serengeti in, and then our vehicles that meet us at the airstrip where we land in the Serengeti. Those vehicles are basically what we use for the entire tour. So we are based in one of those vehicles. One of the best things about them is they have that pop-up roof, which gave us such a fantastic experience with that elephant. because literally he came up and he was at eye level with us, and you were just standing out, standing with your head out of this pop-up section. The traveling, typically we would take a packed lunch, and one of the things that I think has done really well on this tour is that the lodges have a very neat system where there is almost a buffet where you go along and you actually sort out what you would like to eat. And you then literally bag it. You get a brown bag and you put your name on it. And then we would drive to a place typically where we could get out in the national parks. That is restricted. You can't get out just anywhere you feel like, and there is always a need for a comfort stop. We would find an area which is where it is safe to get out, and we would make use of the front or the back of the vehicle for whatever needed doing. So that's pretty much it. You're in those vehicles. We travel from where we land in the central Serengeti, depending on where the migration may be at the time of our tour next year or on future tours. We might well head west into the western Serengeti, the corridor area, to see the game just arriving, or these mass columns of wildebeest particularly arriving. Or, as in the case this year, they may already have gone through the Serengeti and are massing around the Ndutu Plains area. So just our daily activity: meet for breakfast, drive out, with a packed lunch, find a place to get out of the vehicle, stretch your legs, comfort stop, and have some lunch, and then head back in the afternoon. Or occasionally, depending on what's happening, we may just go out for a morning drive and then head back to the lodge for lunch, and then head out again in the afternoon for another drive. So it's pretty flexible, but most of the time we will be in our game drive vehicle. Anthony, who's our local guide, has been working with Vent for, I think, over 20 years, knows not only the birds and the animals extremely well, but knows the company and knows what Vent people enjoy. So it's great working with Anthony. And yeah, generally speaking, the lodges are really comfortable. Generally speaking, insects are not a problem. Tarangire, you are more than likely to meet up with a very interesting little animal called a tsetse fly, which is a biting horsefly type insect, which actually will certainly get your attention. And that's probably the only downside of Tarangire, is the fact that a lot of your activity is punctuated with the odd slap as one of these insects lands on you and tries to bite you.
Lisa has a question here again about the safari vehicles. How bouncy are the rides, and how long is a typical day driving around?
Okay, so the vehicles, they're on a Toyota chassis. They are fairly firmly sprung. The roads themselves are generally in fairly good condition, and the speed that we drive at is certainly not excessive. So generally speaking, bouncy is not a particular issue on the trip. We do try and make sure that, for example, apart from the regular stops when needed for bathroom breaks, we do, if we are on a full day out, we would actually make sure, for example, we would stop for about an hour for lunch and just really get a chance to, sort of get out of the vehicle mode and give everybody a break. Seat rotation is a policy throughout the tour. So we start and we continue rotating in a circular clockwise fashion. So each day you've got a slightly different seat and a different view. And basically the group size is designed so that we each have a window seat.
Yeah, because I think, Jeff, right, the Land Cruiser holds 8 participants, and so you have a driver, and then if the tour is 6 people and you 7, then everybody is inside of this Land Cruiser with a pop-up top.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, everybody rotates the seats and has a window. It does have really nice suspension, so it's not bouncy. They are 4-wheel drive, so they can get you through pretty much anything.
Yeah, it's a pretty comfortable and relaxed tour from that point of view.
Nadine has a question here about the timing of this tour. We're highlighting February, March, but she also wants to know what's the difference in August.
Okay, so the reverse of what we're talking about in terms of this tour happens when everything or all the long distance movers actually turn around and head back to the Mara system in Kenya. So it is a mirror image, if I can put it that way, of what we see. It is a little harder sometimes to predict because the rains at that time of the year are a little more erratic or a little bit harder to pin down in a particular slot. But, truth be told, we are very dependent on when the rains happen as to, are these animals here yet? Are they already past? In fact, on this year's tour, because the follow-up rains were so delayed, the animals had turned round after we had left at the end of the tour. The animals turned round and were heading back into the western part of the Serengeti, still desperately waiting and looking for the rains. And the rains finally started, the follow-up rains finally started, I think, 4 weeks after we'd left. But that's unusual. We normally on this tour have rain a couple of days while we're traveling through the Tanzanian parks. And that is, of course, what triggers particularly the calving of the wildebeest. You may notice that some of the pictures you saw this evening, there were already some calves with some of the groups that we saw. They just couldn't hold out any longer. So they were now moving with the calves in search of that highly nutritious new grass.
Well, it looks like that wraps up our questions from the audience at this point. So I would like to ask you one final question, Jeff. If someone is on the fence about joining, what is the one reason you would encourage them not to miss this trip?
I think for me, the sight of so many animals moving. I was born in South Africa. I've traveled extensively in Africa. And quite honestly, that morning when we crested the rise at Ndutu and looked off to the furthest mountains and just saw this ribbon of wildebeest heading our way, is just something that we have a saying, only in Africa. There's just some things that you just can't see anywhere else. And in this instance, it would be only in Tanzania, or possibly if you were waiting in August on the other side of the coin and waiting for the animals to come back into the Mara, you could see something similar. But that was so powerful and so emotive that I can't wait to get back. And I can't wait to get back again and again and again, because every year it's different and every year it is still awesome and special.
Great. Well, with that, we thank you, Jeff, for your wonderful presentation today.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks everybody for attending. I've enjoyed showing you this rather special place.
We hope you will consider joining us on our future departure in February of 2026. We hope to see you in the field on event tour soon. Thank you very much.